Do you need help protecting your finances as you enter retirement? David Dickens of KC Financial Advisors has got you covered. Welcome to the Cover Your Assets KC podcast.
It's another edition of the Cover Your Assets KC podcast. We got a great show on the way for you today. We're going to be talking about millennials and retirement planning. Walter Storholt here alongside David Dickens, President and Wealth Advisor at KC Financial Advisors, serving you throughout KC with an office in Overland Park as well. You can find us online at coveryourassetskc.com. David, this one should be a good one. I may sound like I've got a little bit more vim and vigor in the voice today because we're talking about my neck of the woods, millennials. This is great.
There you go. Well, so I think most of our population, certainly most of my clients, are either baby boomers or Gen Xers. But most baby boomers, most Gen Xers, if you got kids, they're millennials. So if something in here rings your bell as a parent, then tell your kid to take a listen to this, and hopefully there's at least one or two things that we're going to talk about today that'll be super beneficial for our millennial friends.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I hope I'm checking off some of these boxes already as a millennial, but if I'm not, then I will be educated on today's show and will be able to set my course of action in the right direction. So
I'll just bet you are setting the curve, Walter.
Might be. We'll see. I try to take all of these great lessons you give me, even though I've in the millennial group and you're mostly talking to those other generations, I still try to be ahead of the curve, so I listened to my grandmother growing up. I've told the story many times on the show before of how she was, went to school and became a vice president of a bank very late in life and always taught us very good financial lessons early on and gifted us small amounts of, stock instead of the traditional grandma presents growing up. But
nice.
Has always talked about the importance of saving for the future and that kind of thing. So she got us off on a good foot in this direction. But we'll see. This will be a good, I'll be able to grade myself and see how we're doing. All right, so David, what's the first tip or first item for millennials to be thinking about?
Well, so what got me thinking about this, I saw a study, it's a Bank of America study that I think it's called 2020 Better Money Habits. It's a millennials report that they put out on a regular basis. So, we used to have Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. They've kind of lumped Y and Z together. So a millennial, by definition, right now seems to be, if you're age 24 to 41, so a pretty big group of people, those are the people that we're talking about today. So they're still a long way from retirement. Some of them are really early in their career. What are some things, I'm going to give you 4 things that I think should be super important to you as you go through the next, say, 15 or 20 years to get you to the point where maybe you're 50 or 55 and you can see it from there and you're going to look around and go, you know what? I've done a pretty good job for myself. So of the 4 things, the first one is, before I go to number 1, the one thing that I have learned over my rather long work history is if you do a super good job of concentrating on your career and your work, that's going to be the tool you're going to use to build your retirement wealth over the years. If you're constantly underemployed, it's going to be really hard to reach the retirement goals you might have in mind. But if you're constantly working on your career and increasing that salary, maybe you've got a couple of side gigs going on, however you do it, but working on your career is number 1. I've got 4 other things after that. So once you're focused on your career, the first thing you really need to make sure you're doing is saving. Now that just sounds so simple, and if you're in a company that offers a 401k, it is relatively simple. You can kind of put it on autopilot. How much should you save? Well, I think that the minimum that you should be saving is about 10% of what you make. And each year, hopefully you're able to increase that percentage by a little bit. Set your own goals. Whatever your lifestyle costs you is going to determine how much more you can save. But you really need to set yourself up with a lifestyle that costs you less than what you earn. And make sure you're putting at least 10% of your own money into your 401k. So you say, well, Dave, my employer puts in 4%, so I'm just putting in 6%. What I'm suggesting to you is if you want to achieve your financial goals, you are very likely to need to start with 10% of your own money, and hopefully your employer has a match.
Sort of a leave no doubt kind of thing. Actually, this is a great example because a lot of people through COVID, if they didn't lose their jobs, may have had a situation where they had some benefits cut. And employers, I know a lot of employers are taking breaks from contributing to those plans. And so if you were used to only putting away that 6% under your example there, well, now you're sort of under-saving for the future. So do yourself a favor and get used to committing the necessary amount yourself. And then I guess, the employer matches just gravy after that?
It is. And that $1,200 check they sent to your house? Well, did you spend that or did you spend half of it and save the rest? You work a long time, but the money you save early has so many more years to compound. And you say, well, I've got student debt, I've got all these other things I have to worry about, and I got to party with my friends. And there's a lot of things that are important to do when you're in your 20s and 30s. But one of the most important is to make sure you have a plan that you feel good with, and you're feathering your own nest for retirement. You're putting away money systematically every 2 weeks to benefit yourself when you're an old guy or an old girl.
That's a great point. Yeah, pay yourself first, that kind of mentality. I think that's a great way to go about it. All right, so that one makes a lot of sense. Get the job is priority 0, like the starting point. Make sure you're employed. And then when you are, start saving right away. Don't delay. Don't put it off. I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want to save for retirement yet because I've got these other things I want to take care of first. That temptation is really strong, I think, to kind of underfund your accounts in the early years because for the first time maybe you're getting that check or maybe you've improved your job situation. You want to realize the gains of where that hard work has led you. But it's really hard once you get used to contributing a certain amount to then turn that up as you go.
It is. And so there are nuances. I don't mean to, this very little in my business is black and white. So if you've got a big student loans, you're saying, well, Dave, I can't quite do the 10%. At a minimum, if your company makes a match, make sure that you qualify for the match. And then each year, increase from there. But, your goal is to be saving at least 10% of your own money for retirement.
That's a great point. All right, so that's tip number 1. What about the second thing that we should be thinking about now and into the next 15, 20 plus years?
Well, everybody's worried about what Social Security is going to be and is it even going to be around and et cetera, et cetera. And I just certainly don't know that answer for sure, but I think I know the answer. So you probably know if you've listened to our podcast for a while, Social Security was created in 1935, and back then you had to be 65 to start getting it. And life expectancy back then was 65. So you really weren't ever supposed to get there. And if you were, you weren't going to collect it very long. Today, if you're a millennial, your retirement age is 67 and life expectancy is 86. So you'll be getting Social Security for a long time. The reason I bring that up is they have to make changes to Social Security to keep it viable. One of the changes that I'm convinced they're going to make is that as a millennial, your retirement age is not going to be 67 when you can get your full Social Security benefits. It's going to be 70, maybe higher. But if life expectancy is 86 and edging higher, it's very unlikely that your full retirement age will remain at 67. So count on the fact that you're going to be getting Social Security, you're going to be starting Social Security at 70, and you may choose to or need to continue to work until age 70. And you're going to be a young 70 when you get there.
A young 70. I like that. That's a good concept. Yeah, I definitely kind of plan for, I guess as I'm grading myself here, I pretend that we're not going to get Social Security by the time we get to our 60s and 70s. So if it's still around in some way, shape, or form, and then gravy and bonus, but I'm trying to plan at least for the future like it's not going to be very helpful.
And frankly, Walter, for your plan, that's a great outlook because I'm convinced it will be there. But if you plan to not need it, well, then that's gravy when it shows up.
I like building in lots of buffer into the financial plan. So I count that as some buffer, perhaps. Make it work without it. Then if it's there, that's just one more box to check. So I feel pretty good. I'm 2 for 2 so far on some of these things that we should be thinking about in terms of planning, David. Let's see if I can go 4 for 4 on the show. What's item number 3?
Well, I know you're 3 for 3 because the offline comments, conversations we've had have demonstrated that to me. But I'm going to suggest that our millennial listeners diversify their investments, not just a 401k, but have some real estate. So it has worked particularly well for me over the years. I bought a home early on, and I think owning a home is a super good way to build your net worth, because as you make your monthly payments, part of that is principal and part of it is interest. Well, the interest goes to the bank or the mortgage company, but the principal is basically a side piggy bank you're putting money in. And typically, the cost of homes increases over time. So what you're doing is putting money into an appreciating asset. I did an entire podcast on various types of assets, but your home is an appreciating asset, whereas your vehicle is a depreciating asset. It goes down in value over time. Your home, most homes go up over time. So diversifying into real estate, if it's just buying a home, I think is a super good move for people in their 20s and 30s. If you happen to be able to further diversify into owning, say, a rental property or two, now that also adds an element of risk, which you want to think through real clearly. But there are a lot of tax benefits for being a landlord. Now, if everybody moves out and you're sitting there and you still have a mortgage on that rental property, that doesn't feel so good for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months. So it's not a riskless proposition. But sometimes for certain individuals, owning rental properties can be a really good additional strategy for them.
Yeah, that's something I've thought a lot about, David, because having been a homeowner for a couple of years now, and on our second home, and this one being a major fixer-upper, I've really enjoyed the problems. I've enjoyed fixing them. I've enjoyed learning a little bit of plumbing and some flooring and exploring those kinds of things. And so I've thought, well, maybe I would be a good fit for working on, having a rental property, so that when those things come up, since I enjoy doing those fixes and those kinds of things, I don't think I would be in that camp where I would view that as a burden to go and have to take care of issues when they pop up here and there. And I think if you get a decent property, then those issues are hopefully not going to be popping up all the time. But I think that's my biggest worry, is the human component of that. Being a landlord, dealing with having to find tenants, and if they have problems and issues, handling those and dealing with those. I can see that entering a little extra stress into my life. So it's been one thing that I would view as sort of a barrier to getting into that. But I do feel a pull toward getting into it and at least trying it, perhaps.
Yeah, and so those barriers to entry keep a lot of people out, which tends to make it a more attractive investment once you decide, okay, I'm going to put up with some of those difficulties and troubles. I'll assure you, your stock portfolio never calls you at midnight saying, hey, my air conditioner just stopped running.
That's right. That's a great point. Yeah, so that's a good thing to think about. Know yourself. I imagine a good piece of advice, if I ever do get into the rental property game, David, I feel like this would be decent advice. Start small, right? Like start with a small property that's not a lot of square footage, that's low to buy, low risk in terms of monthly mortgage that you're on the hook for, and those kinds of things, and make your mistakes with a smaller property before you go bigger.
I think that makes tremendous sense. And then, you know what? Maybe you never go bigger. Or maybe you end up with 3 or 4 properties, rental properties, and you decide to sell them all and buy a small apartment building. There are a lot of different ways to do it. And maybe your 401k ends up being your primary vehicle. But the more you can diversify into different asset classes, you're probably not going to go get a bunch of oil wells. You're probably not going to buy a strip shopping center. But maybe a couple of rental properties might be a fit for who you are and where you're trying to go.
This year was even kind of a good demonstration and illustration of the differences between the stock market and then diversifying with something like rental property or just property in general, as we didn't really see across the country in most markets, didn't really see a dip in prices. The real estate market really kept ticking all through the pandemic. So a little bit different than the volatility that we saw in the stock market over the course of the last couple of months. So
you're exactly right. And the other thing is, nobody ever sends me a statement at the end of each month telling me how much my rental properties are worth. So but the stock market, I get brokerage statements every month. So there's no reason to panic necessarily when the stock market goes down and you see what has happened to your investments, and you might react emotionally like we talked about in last week's podcast. But you're unlikely to act emotionally because the market value of your rental property went down because you wouldn't have any idea that it went down.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's a longer term thing. It's just like you're not going to be day trading unless you're flipping homes. I suppose that's a different type of investing in property.
Totally different. I'm sure there are numbers of podcasts about that too.
Yeah, that's been that was quite a trend for many years. I feel like that has cooled maybe just ever so slightly with how prices have gone up so much on homes, but something to think about certainly as well. We won't dive into all of that on today's show. I think we covered that, diversifying into real estate a pretty good amount. All right, last but not least, what's the fourth thing that millennials should be focused on now in the next 15, 20 plus years?
Well, it kind of circles back around to the way that you save, especially if you're saving through work. This report that I mentioned right at the top of the podcast, it said that in 2020, 73% of millennials are actually saving, and that's up from 63% 2 years ago. So more millennials are saving. And of those that are saving, 24% of them have saved more than $100,000. And that's up from only 8% that have saved over $100,000 back in 2015. So millennials are smart, they're in tune, and they are goal-driven, and they're starting to get stuff done. One thing I would encourage you to do, especially depending on how early you are in your career, if your employer offers a Roth version of the 401k, I'd encourage you need to make a calculation to say, should I be doing the Roth version as opposed to the regular 401k? Now, if you go back through our list of podcasts, you'll see a number of them that are related to Roth IRAs. The big key here is that when you take money out of Roth, when you're over 59 and a half, you don't pay any taxes on that, either the money you put in or the growth. It all comes out tax-free. The money you're putting into your IRA or your 401k, when you take that money out, every penny that you take out is taxed just like a paycheck. So there's a big difference in the way that the money comes out. So the question of the answer to whether you should be putting it into a Roth or a 401k is this. If your tax bracket is lower today than it's going to be when you take the money out, then you should be doing the tax-free version today. You say, well, Dave, I'm 30. How do I know what my tax bracket is going to be when I'm 65? Well, you don't for sure. But I did mention we've got 27 trillion of debt, and we're racking it up at more than $1 trillion a year. And I'm convinced that tax rates are going up. So, for instance, right now, if you're married, filing jointly, and you have taxable income up under $170,000, then you're in the 22% bracket. I'd say there's a super good probability. If you're working, doing well for yourself, there's a really high probability you're going to be in at least the 22% bracket when you retire. If you're single, then if your taxable income is under $85,000, you're in the 22% bracket. Now, let's just say you're listening to this and say, Dave, I get it. Tax rates are going up. Well, then more good news for you. If you make under $326,000 a year, you're in the 24% bracket. What are the chances that tax rates go up a little bit more than that over the next 30 years? I'd say they're quite high. So there's a lot of room. If you make $100,000 or $200,000 or even $300,000 a year as a married couple, or $85,000 or $125,000 or $150,000 as a single, I think there's a lot of room for you to use your Roth 401k instead of your 401k at work. If your employer doesn't offer one, send an email to HR and say, hey, any chance we could have access to a Roth 401k at our office? Chances are pretty good, once a 401k is in place, it's not going to cost the employer much more, if anything, to have a Roth alternative. So sometimes it's knowing what questions to ask and then asking them. But I think, especially for millennials who should expect that their tax rates are going to go up in the future based on what we're spending on, our government is spending today, I think there's a really good idea to make that calculation about Roth versus regular 401k today and each year as you go forward.
The fourth item here, David, I would say we're in the process of checking off. My wife has been contributing to the Roth option in her work for many years now, but we have definitely weighted the contributions to get the immediate tax advantages, so more to the traditional 403b technically for her. But they have that Roth option in there, and we have slowly started to transition more and more to the Roth side in terms of those percentages. So, and I feel like over the next couple of years, we'll really flip that switch and have much of it going into that side versus the traditional. So I'd say that box is half checked. So we're moving that direction a little bit.
And that box is not a one size fits all. So I don't want anybody listening to this podcast thinking, well, Dave just told me I should put every penny into a Roth. Nope. You need to make a calculation. You ought to get some enlightened advice on that. But the probability is that you're going to be better off in a Roth than in a 401k. And once you get into your 40s and 50s and your income is maybe, hopefully, significantly higher than it is today, that's probably when the 401k might make more sense and take the tax deduction then. And frankly, by then your Roth will have grown significantly, so you may end up retiring with a Roth that's the same size as your 401k, and that would be a pretty sweet deal to have that big pot of Roth money tax-free that you can go dip into anytime you want. The other benefit is there's no requirement by the IRS to take money out of that Roth. There is no required minimum distribution like there is with a 401k and an IRA. So it's your pot of tax-free money to do with as you wish once you're over 59 and a half.
Well, that's a great point. These are all, I think, really good pieces of advice for millennials to follow. If you are a millennial, you're thinking about retirement already, you've maybe got that part zero figured out, you've got that career, got that job, and now you're wondering, how can I make the most of this great opportunity so that I can build a retirement that of my dreams? And a lot of us don't think that far ahead. Come on, millennials, we got to be thinking about the future. People are living longer and longer. Life expectancy by the time we get there will probably be even longer as well. And there's my wife's dad. I'll tell you what, David, he's going to be approaching 80 very soon. She was born late in his life. He is biking 15, 20 miles a day. The guy's is incredibly in good shape.
Wow.
He's going to live to be 120. I'm convinced that he's going to be one of those guys that lives forever. Just incredibly in good shape and healthy. And I think there's just more and more people that are going to be living great lives deep into their years. And he is certainly a great case and example of that. And so, let's plan to make those some fun and productive years. And if we plan carefully now, we can benefit in the future. David, I know that you specialize and typically work with folks that are Gen X, Gen Y, the baby boomer generation. What about millennials? Will you work with millennials directly? How can you typically help folks who are in this stage of life?
Well, so I do. Usually they are children of clients, frankly. I hardly get any calls from millennials saying, hey, I need a little help with this, but it does happen. And so I am so happy to answer an email, frankly, from any millennial who listens to this show, and you say, wow, I wonder if he'd answer this question just for me. You bet I would. If you shoot me an email, you'll get probably a little bit of a back and forth, but I would be so happy to answer any question that you have. And if I'm not equipped to answer it, I'll just tell you that. But frankly, when you're in your 20s and 30s and early 40s, you are far enough away from retirement that a little bit of guidance goes a very long way to getting you to the goals that you have set for yourself. It gets way more complicated in your 50s and 60s because there's so many things to think about and the time is short. So a little bit of good advice will take you a long way in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And if you think I might have something to offer you that's specific to you, then please reach out to me, and I'll do whatever I can to help you out.
It's very easy to get in touch. If you're a millennial, you're probably not going to call, let's be honest. If you're a millennial, you're going to get in touch via the web, via email or something like that. So, yeah, coveryourassetskc.com is the website. We all know how to get in touch with David from there. You can just click on Contact, schedule a time to meet, ask a question that might be on your mind, and go back and forth with David that way. So, yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. David's happy to help you with whatever might be on your mind, point you in the right direction, give you some further guidance and advice, just like he does for many folks planning for their retirement futures. So check the show notes of today's episode. We've got more information there. It's all at coveryourassetskc.com, of course. And if you do want to call, it's 913-317-1414, just in case we got some old souls in the audience, David, that want to reach out that way. Thank you so much for the help and the guidance and giving us millennials a little bit of a positive spotlight here. You know, we get the raw end of the deal a lot in the media, David, so it's nice to have a positive conversation about millennials doing something good, saving for retirement, and sounds like saving more than ever and doing a good job these days.
You know, it is an uphill slog in the media for a lot of millennials, but I know a bunch of them, and frankly, the ones I know are doing a heck of a job early in their careers getting things set up. So I applaud you, and you know, keep doing what you're doing. Get a little bit of good advice, and then just keep the pedal to the metal.
You got it. Great advice, and thank you for the help today, David. And thank you for listening to today's show. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we'll talk to you again next time right back here on the Cover Your Assets KC podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, LLC, BCM, a registered investment advisor. BCM and KC Financial Advisors are independent of each other.